Hello, my name is Lois and today I'm going to be reviewing The Return of the King, part 3 of Lord of the Rings. And this is my first time reading Lord of the Rings, so this is quite a fresh reaction. Although I did finish reading the book about 2 weeks ago, although that's the main story, I've still been reading the appendices. I'm just kind of flicking through those because I don't think they're essential, but they are helpful. The third part of J.R.R. Tolkien's epic adventure, The Lord of the Rings. The armies of the Dark Lord are massing as his evil shadow spreads even wider. Men, dwarves, elves and ents unite forces to do battle against the dark. Meanwhile, Frodo and Sam struggle further into Mordor in their heroic quest to destroy the One Ring. So first, my reaction to The Lord of the Rings as a whole. I'm so mixed because sometimes I found it quite difficult to read, but at the same time it's clearly a masterpiece. Like, the histories of it, the languages that Tolkien has written, the plot as a whole, it's clearly incredible. I've never read anything like it, and you can see how it's just become such a backbone to modern fantasy. So in the past on this channel I've talked a lot about C.S. Lewis and gone through the Narnia books, and something that you do notice in contrast is in the Narnia books you have this focus on Aslan as the kind of Christ figure in the story, but in Lord of the Rings you can kind of see the figure of Christ within a lot of different characters. So in The Two Towers I saw a lot of this in Gandalf. When he became Gandalf the White, it almost reminded me of the Transfiguration. But in this story, I think you see that a lot in Sam and Frodo and also in Aragorn. So first I want to talk about Frodo. Now I feel like there are two sides to Frodo. He is clearly a hobbit, he's not particularly strong or skilled in any way. But then there's another side to him that almost feels more elvish. I feel like you can kind of see this in his character. He behaves very differently from the other hobbits. I suppose he is the ring bearer and has a heavier responsibility. But the other hobbits are largely more playful, more constantly thinking and talking about food. But Frodo is a bit more calm and reserved. And we can see this much more clearly by the end of the story, where he doesn't even feel like he fits in properly at the Shire anymore. He's changed and he decides to go with Gandalf and the elves across the sea. So you kind of get this small echo of Christ being both God and man. Obviously not to the same degree, but with Frodo as being hobbit, but also some kind of elvish aspect to him. And whilst I'm now reading the appendices, you do get a bit more of this idea of having multiple natures, or kind of a blend between elves and men. And I think that's an interesting idea. It also reminds me of in Genesis when you have the sons of God having children with the daughters of men. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting. And next on to Sam. How can you not love Sam? The quest would surely have failed without him rescuing Frodo, without him carrying him up a mountain. And just such a loyal and devoted friend. And then the verse comes to my mind of there's no greater love than to lay one's life down for one's friends. And Sam really does that. He gives everything. He almost dies as well, so that he can faithfully serve his master and support Frodo in completing the quest as best as they can. Other things that I've written about Frodo and Sam together is that they're so focused, they're single-minded, and how powerful they are because of that. Also, that they were not bitter at their circumstances. It feels very much that they're just kind of thrown into this story. Frodo didn't choose to be given the ring, he just was, and Sam was also kind of just roped into it. And there they are in Mordor, facing their deaths, captured by orcs, and they're not bitter or angry, they are just getting by as best as they can. And even though they have such a tiny amount of hope, they keep persevering and persevering until the end. I've also written down that if the hobbits and men were not prepared to die, then they just would have died differently. And then again the verse comes to my mind that he who tries to save his life will lose it. If they just tried to flee or hide or ignore the threat of Sauron, then they would have eventually been like taken slaves or killed anyway. Like, if you're not willing to choose something bigger than yourself and you're just trying to be cowardly or hide, then eventually whatever's chasing you is going to catch up with you anyway. So in contrast to the hobbits, who were willing to lay down their lives and everything they'd ever known, you have Denethor, who was the steward of Gondor. And Denethor, I think, was probably the most nuanced and the most human out of all the characters. He's not clearly a hero or a villain, but he is in the position where he and his family have been in charge of Gondor for as long as they can remember. But he is in this position when Gondor is heavily under attack, where he knows that either they're going to lose, everyone's going to be horribly killed, and they're going to be under the reign of Sauron, which he's fought all of his life against. Or even if they win, he knows that Aragorn is coming back, who's going to be the true king, and they're not going to need the stewards anymore. So all of his power and everything that he's known will be taken from him. He thinks his son is dying, so he kind of doesn't feel like he has much left to live for anyway. So he becomes very destructive. And I like, rather than, Tolkien being someone who tells you this person is good, this person is bad, he just shows you what the characters are like, what their focuses are on, and what the consequences are to that. And the idea that he literally builds his own pyre and puts himself in his own hell, I think is beautifully written. Okay, next we have Aragorn, who, is the king in Return of the King. And Aragorn is an amazing character. I feel like quite different to Denethor in the way that it's kind of hard to relate to Aragorn because he's so good. He's brave and noble and selfless. And he is just a strong picture of Christ in this story. So he knows that he has to go down into the paths of the dead, which kind of reminds me of Christ descending into hell. And then he is the only one who's able to command this kind of undead army. And then you have after the battle where Aragorn's the only one who's able to heal those who are kind of afflicted with this kind of spiritual darkness after they've been attacked. And I think it's written, there's some kind of prophecy about the healing hands of a king, which again feels very Christ-like. And something I'm sure that I've seen online as well is that Aragorn is kind of an epitome of masculinity. He shows kind of what it's really like to be a great man. He is brave and strong, but he's also gentle and kind. It's very much a story where the heroes are heroic. They all demonstrate these different virtues that work together to help them complete the quest. Okay, next we have Eowyn, and I really liked the character of Eowyn. I felt like she is just such a girl. She's very capable, she's very brave, but she's also quite stubborn. And in many ways she's kind of right as well. If Eowyn didn't sneak off to the battle, then quite possibly the Witch King would not have been killed. And what I like about Faramir as well is that he wants the good of the people over the power. And he is not afraid to let go of and lose power and control over Gondor that the line of stewards has had. He is happy to be released from that and to take whatever is rightfully given to him by the king. I think that reminds me of one of the parables and verses that I really love about humbling yourself and then you'll be exalted. Now, for some of the more villainous characters in the story, I've written the wicked will devour each other, or the wicked will devour themselves. And I really like that in the story, whilst you do have some of the big battles in the siege on Gondor and around Gondor itself, particularly in Mordor, you see that Sam and Frodo don't actually have to do very much fighting. So the biggest threat to them in Mordor, I suppose, is the orcs. So they're trying to hide from the orcs and not get caught, and then when they are captured they have to escape. But the orcs as a threat are not that terrible actually, because they spend a lot of the time being distracted, fighting each other. When Frodo is captured, they start fighting over his possessions and who gets to give him up to Sauron, who gets the glory. So they're kind of distracted by their own greed and their own pride. And we also see a similar thing with Gollum. So Gollum is pursuing Sam and Frodo because he wants the ring for himself. And he's quite dangerous. He's shown that he's willing to betray them, try and kill them whenever he can, as long as he gets the ring. But Frodo, particularly, Sam somewhat less, have this sense that they can't kill him, or that they shouldn't kill him for some reason, that they should show mercy and pity toward him. And this really ends up being for their benefit. When they're at Mount Doom, and Frodo himself is so strongly tempted by the ring that he can't cast it into the fire, and then Gollum comes, attacks him, trying to take the ring off him for himself, and falls into Mount Doom with the ring. Gollum literally went and did the job for them, and I felt like there was kind of a similarity between Denethor and Gollum, that they both died by fire, like Gollum literally falling into a volcano. And whilst it was a little bit less deliberately than Denethor burning himself on a pyre, there's still this idea of him going into hell, or falling into hell of his own making. And that this also didn't require the good, humble, meek hobbits to have to cause any bloodshed themselves. So I liked that the end of the story was not just them having the ring cast into Mount Doom and a joyful celebration where Aragorn is crowned king. No, they have to go and deal with the consequences of what has happened in the Shire as well. One element I liked about the Shire was how evil sneaks in, and how evil is also allowed and permitted to come in. Because at first it's not just the ruffians coming in and taking control, it's some of the hobbits themselves allowing or even wanting things to change in that way. And then I liked that also things took time to rebuild afterwards. They couldn't just come back, kick out the ruffians, and everything was the same as before. They then had to dismantle some of the new ugly things that had been built, and also they had to replant all the trees that had been cut down. You can't just grow trees again overnight, and there's a few things about Sam and Frodo being sad about how long it would be until they'd be able to see the trees again. So those are the things that really stood out to me personally. I'd love to hear what it is that really sticks with you from this story, and what characters had the biggest impact on you. Overall, whilst it has not been the easiest story to read and get through, I think it is well compensated for by the great depth, the wonderful characters, and the reflection that Lord of the Rings has of reality, of how good and evil work together and against each other. And all of that is built upon amazing world building filled with maps, songs, poems, languages. But yes, thank you so much for joining me to reflect on my first time reading and finishing The Lord of the Rings. I can't wait to now watch the movie. And yes, I hope you have a wonderful day. See you next time.